Chairman, for the nice introduction, and I also like to thank to the organizing committee for giving the opportunity to present my research and for selecting me to receive this prestigious award. So I come from the Ben-Gurion University, and Ben-Gurion is named after a person. So who knows who was Ben-Gurion? Oh, great.
And then who created Israel? Born in Poland.
So it's true, Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister of Israel, and Ben-Gurion really likes to stand on his head. He said it's really producing some creativity, healthy thinking, you know. Eventually, Ben-Gurion was a big visionary, initiated basically the heart of Israel, and he really known for thinking out of the box. And that's basically all of us here in this room that really likes to think out of the box. That's why we're here. And in this conference, I think that's a very unique conference. That it's one of those huge conferences. You have really the opportunity to talk with people and see how new ideas come out. So in this talk, I will tell you about how small devices, analytical devices, can basically measure, continuously monitor multiple molecules from the body, and these molecules have some relevance to medical conditions. And to do that, I will start with a short introduction about current advantages and challenges for continuously monitoring molecules in the body. Then I will focus on the great potential of measuring those molecules for mental health treatment. I'll present an example of our approach of how we use semi-smart microsystems. And when I say semi-smart, I mean those devices that are partially selective to multiple molecules that we measure. We'll show how they can modify, affect the transduced electronic signals from those molecules, and some examples for real-world application. And then I will summarize and conclude. So every day now we see more and more evidence that diseases behave differently in every person. Not only that, this is no longer considered as one disease, but a complex of many diseases with different profiles of DNA, of proteins, of metabolites, and of course the relationship to medications. So in order to first study those kind of diseases, we need to have a way to continuously monitor or measure those molecules in the body. And that's led to the explosion of very modern technology that continues to generate healthcare information about our body, such of course the glucose sensors that you see out of here, and the integration with apps that continuously analyze the genetic information. But we still have a problem there, and also Professor Turner said yesterday that we don't have a lot of examples of actually continuously monitoring those molecules from the body. And the major challenges for that these kind of molecules usually are present in very low concentrations in the body. So already we're dealing with a very low signals of introduced information. The levels are different in different locations in the body, but also changing over time. So we have intra-individual variability. There are also other molecules in the body, so they also contribute to some background signal, and also the signal changes between different people, so we have inter-individual variability. And most importantly, measuring only one or two or three different types of molecules is no longer enough to produce the full understanding about the physiological status of a person. But then sometimes it's needed to measure 10 or 15 different molecules. So there is a need for sensing approaches that will, of course, provide sensitive and selective information about molecules, but broad enough to access the full, all the information from the different molecules. So many of these molecules are redox active, which means they can be reduced or oxidized on surface of electrons. So we use electrochemistry to measure those molecules. proven approaches to current approaches to improve the quality of the information, the molecular information that are being transduced from these molecules, such as micro-nanofabricated structures, using 3D structures to increase the surface area of electrodes, increase the more optimal bioelectronic interface, such as the electronic skin, using materials that increase the rate that electron transfer between the molecules and the electrodes, such as the electrostatic graphene, of course we heard yesterday, and using specific biorecognition elements that differentially filter this information from the molecules into electronic signals, such as enzymes. Yet we see some limited performance in biological fluids, and that's mainly because when the amount of molecules is high, that now developing specific ignition elements for each one of them become costly and lengthy, and now we are dealing with signals for molecules that overlap with each other, and new approaches needed to differentiate the signals or the molecules from each other. So the work in my group, we proposed an alternative approach that is based on semi-smart biomicrosystems. And when I say semi-smart, I mean semi-selective. It means that the systems are partially selective to the different types of the molecules that produce different selectivity to the molecules. And to do that, we hypothesize that we can use redox ionic biopolymers that can manipulate the characteristics of the transduced bioelectronic signal. And to do that, we can either amplify the electronic signals, or we can also differentiate those signals from the molecules from other cross-reactive or from other molecules that we are not able to distinguish. In my group, we also integrate those different functionalities on microfabricated microsystems, producing these semi-smart devices that now can probe different aspects, different molecules from the complex sample and transduce them into electronic signals, where there we could do also further signal processing approaches to differentiate those signals. With the end goal that we can. So before I a bit about mental health, those who don't know, 1 in every 4 people is diagnosed, will be diagnosed with mental disorder. And there are currently major challenges of how to diagnose those complex diseases and how to treat them, optimal treatment. And there are not a lot of examples of how bioelectronic devices can actually help managing those diseases. I gave you 2 examples. One is more general example for the glucometers of because diabetes is one of the major side effects for these antipsychotic medications, and more specific example by Medimate that produced a point-of-care testing device to continuously measure lithium ion, which is the medication for bipolar. Now, us as the bioelectronics and advanced materials community have the opportunity to really help these diseases and really improve the way those patients are being diagnosed with the disorder. And over there is a specific medication called clozapine. Now, clozapine is currently the most effective medication available for schizophrenia, but it's dramatically underutilized in the US. It's less than 5% of patients actually taking the medication, compared to 30 to 40. That's have to be done every week. So many patients actually stop taking the medication, and we noticed that by continuously monitoring of those the treatment of clozapine would help close the loop between patients and physicians. So current approaches to measure or to analyze clozapine based on its redox activity, reduced and oxidized by a 2-electron reaction, and the current literature shows 2 main approaches. One approach is towards pre-separation of clozapine from other molecules in the blood, and other approaches is by coupling with semi-selective oxidation reactions, such with an enzyme, how also H2-oxidase. Yet we still see a very limited in situ monitoring of this medication in blood, mainly due to the poor bioelectronic signal transductions mechanism of the medication, which is due to other cross-reactive or uninterfering molecules in the blood. So in this report I will show two main examples of how we can use manipulate electronic signals to amplify the signal from clozapine or by differentiating its signal from other interfering molecules. So in order to do that, first we need to have a way an easy way to modify the surface of electrodes. Later on we can do that on a microfabricated device. And for that we use the simple bifurcation method of chitrogen. And chitrogen is a pH-dependent bipolymer that now by changing the pH, it changes its solubility. So we use this in presence of electrodes, microelectrodes, that now by doing hydrolysis condition of the electrode, changes the pH and cause the electrodeposition of the chitrogen on the surface of the electrode. That could be done in a very controlled way. By changing the deposition time, for example, you could produce a few hundreds of nanometers thickness of chitrogen. We also demonstrated the ability to integrate these films, chitrogen films, in microelectrodes. That now we have a way to further modify it to affect the induced electronic signal. So first, by amplifying the signal, I will show you how we can do that. We modify the electrodes with chitrogen and then we introduce them with the redox acting material catechol. The catechol, after oxidation agent, it can be grafted on the surface, on the amine group of the chitrogen, resulting in a catechol chitrogen film. Now see what happens now that in the presence of a redox acting material such as ferritin, the ferritin fused to the electrode being oxidized. And usually if there's only the electrode, it will diffuse back to the solution because it's a one-time reaction. Now what happens now is that the ferritin diffused towards it being oxidized. But instead of going back to the solution, it's being reduced back by the catechol. So now it being regenerated into the reduced state and can donate another set of electrons. And that could be done in a multiple ways. So overall, the generated charge or current from the clozapine, from one molecule of clozapine being amplified. And we see that in the cyclic thermogram, when we see the different potentials and the current measured from this reaction and higher current from the bottom of the screen, those peak characteristics are related to the oxidation of the ferritin, and the black curve shows the signal from the same concentration of ferritin on the bare electrode, and the red one shows the amplified signal, amplified current from the modified electrode. And that's a very modular system, because now only by changing the potential that we apply, we can control the flow, direction of the flow of the electrons. In the beginning, it was from the solution to the electrode. Now, by changing into reduction, reducing the currents, we can flow the electrons from the electrode to the solution, and now use ruthenium as a reducing material to continuously recharge the catechol and to maintain the amplification potential of this thing. So we wanted to test how it can actually amplify the signal from clozapine, and by measuring clozapine in the same concentration with the unmodified, the bare, and the modified electrode, it demonstrated higher current characteristic, which is about 3 times higher current for the same concentration. And by measuring the dose response characteristics of the current versus different concentrations of clozapine, it demonstrated for the black dots shows better sensing performance. Sensitivity usually attributed to the slope of this curve. We also registered to see if it also able to differentiate with its metabolite, no clozapine, and this also had therapeutic effect information, and that's going to be seen with these measurements where the red curve is from the clozapine and the blue curve is for the no clozapine itself. So we see some shift with the oxidation potential of the metabolite. So further study that miniaturized these kind of films onto microfabricated devices using 3 gold electrodes and as a working in the counter, and the reference is a silver chloride, which was done by 2-step electroplating. And using this kind of system now, also known as the lab-on-a-chip devices, to provide a high throughput and an analysis of very low volumes of the samples, but also an automated and easy to operate way, which allows us now to show that by changing the biofabrication parameters of the catechol catechol film, for example, by the thickness of the chitosan or by the amount of catechol being grafted on the chitosan, the different colors demonstrate the amount of charge that was transferred. So we can actually control the amount of charge being transferred by the clozapine only by changing the biofabrication properties, parameters. It's also done on the miniaturized device that also we want to see that we still have the better sensing performance of clozapine on the lab chip compared to bare gold electrode. And eventually we were able to show that it could differentiate between two different concentrations of clozapine in undiluted human serum. That was the first demonstration of the miniaturized device that could do in situ clozapine measurement. So the other aspect of differentiating or shifting the signal of the clozapine from other interference species, and for that we use the electrocatalytic carbon nanotubes encapsulated or collated deposited with the chitosan bipolymer. And now the hypothesis is that now we have higher surface area. So if you look at how the signal characteristics look like, and this is a cyclic voltammetry, means we see those peak characteristics related to the oxidation of the redox molecule. And the idea is that the potential at peak and the current at peak will be affected by this by the carbon nanotubes. And for high surface area, it will amplify the signal, the current, and also because of the electrocatalytic properties, it will increase the rate of electron transfer from the molecule to the electrode. So we can see a shift of the potential toward lower potentials. So, so we are able to measure that with presence of redox couple called ferrocyanide, ferricyanide, and these are the peak characteristics of different loadings of carbon nanotubes. And we see that for the higher loadings of the carbon nanotubes, the current decreased was between 1 to 5% carbon nanotube loading, and the peak potential also shifted to lower potential. Now, when we look how it affects, how the density of the carbon nanotubes affects the clozapine signal of the uric acid, I want to show here how this is a plot that shows the potential of the anodic peak for bare electrode and for the different densities of the carbon nanotubes. And in the black, we see the clozapine potential. So compared to bare electrode and the modified carbon nanotubes, we don't see much change. We see a bit increase. But when you look at the uric acid for the bare electrode, we see dramatic decrease when we use the carbon nanotubes with the chitosan. And also some changes, could be some changes also depending on the amount of the carbon nanotubes. So by changing the potential, we can now measure a mixture of uric acid and clozapine and see how the peak potential of uric acid was shifted to lower potentials and basically differentiating the clozapine from the uric acid, because uric acid is one of the major interfering molecules that are present, that are in the joint and that are present in the blood. There are some questions about if we can even translate that into practice, and for that we wanted to first see if there is some how it could behave with real undiluted samples, blood samples, serum samples from healthy subjects, and that's a result of the bare gold electrode with serum in different concentrations of clozapine, so we don't see any change with the signal, and that was done with the carbon nanotubes, with the encapsulated carbon nanotube, which shows the increased current characteristics for higher concentrations of clozapine in human serum, which was also presented the required limit of detection that is relevant to the clinical range, which was between 300 to 1,000 nanogram per milliliter. we want to see some, first feasibility of actually measuring risk of any patients that are taking the medication. And this result is that the current was measured different potentials for a patient that is not taking the medication, which is the black curve. And the red curve is for a patient that is taking the medication. So these increased current characteristics in the about 0.35 potential were correlated to the action concentrations of the clozapine in the serum from the calibration curve, which gave, let's say, that a good match to the actual level to measure in a commercial lab. Commercial lab usually takes about 2 to 3 days to get the results back. But it's only the feasibility, so of course there had to be higher level of tests, higher number of tests, and more better measurements of the accuracy of the test. So I'd like to summarize and show some highlights of other aspects of this project, and that's when I showed you here how we can use redox responsive biopolymers to manipulate the characteristic of the bioelectronic signal that will help us by integrating them in the microsystem to now probe different molecules in these complex samples in situ. And for that, the goal was to enable a point-of-care testing of clozapine treatment monitoring. So we also use different types of pattern recognition algorithms to differentiate the specific signals from the molecules that we want to measure, such as clozapine, but also its metabolites, from the other molecules that are present in the signals that we measure. We also integrate that with a leveraging device for white blood cell counting, because differentiating white blood cells is also it's important because one of the major side effects for the treatment clozapine, so it's a safety marker. And I showed you some initial studies for human factors and clinical tests, and that's being done together with Professor Kelly from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, which is director of the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. So current activities that we have in my lab is further trying to understand the mechanism, the first mechanism between different molecules in this kind of complex fluids to enable this kind of in situ analysis. Also work on different aspects of devices or platforms to improve the interface with the biological system, such as flexible substrates. And also eventually, we would like to enable this full system that enables both sensing and treatment for the disease, such as very much known for diabetes. And right now, we're open for any kind of collaboration of these subjects, and if any students would like to further study these kind of problems, they're fully welcome. And eventually, I am sure that everyone here really believe that if eventually we enable such molecular information, such high quality molecular information, we could really help overcome specific challenges for to study those kind of diseases that eventually we want to improve the treatment of these diseases. So I'd like to thank you all, and this is my group, the Nanobioelectronics group in Ben-Gurion University. Dr. Shukla is a postdoc that's done some of the work related to carbonated recapsulation in chitin. We have Ms. Savia Lavon, university students Rajendra Alon and staff, and the undergrads that's currently working on different aspects of devices in the lab. This project began as a collaboration with the University of Maryland College Park with Professor Gotts and Professor Payne, and also with Professor Kelly, as I mentioned, and now it's continuously also in my lab. And with that, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I look forward to hear any questions.
So, thank you, Adar, for your really nice talk. Are there any questions?